Hello everyone, my name is Shubhajit and you are watching Web Dev Shubhajit. So here we are today with another advanced topic of JavaScript, which is throttling. Throttling is very much similar to debouncing, which I have actually covered in my previous video. So if you haven't watched that, I would highly encourage you to watch that first because there will be a lot of similarity between debouncing and throttling. So if you watch that video, it will be really easy to understand this one also. Okay. So I will also put it in the description so you can just go through that. So what is throttling? Let me give you an example. Let's say on the UI we have a scroll event. Okay, we are listening to a scroll event on the whole body and we are triggering some function on it. And let's say that function is a bit heavy or it takes some time to compute over whenever we are scrolling. And you should understand that the scrolling event happens a lot faster. Like we scroll a little bit and a lot of events, scroll events are triggered in that. So in that case, what will happen is the UI will be cluttered with those scroll events. And we might not need that much frequent scroll events. So we might need that, okay, we are scrolling now and we scrolled for some 1 or 2 seconds and we want that only 1 or 2 API calls, that is per second or per 2 seconds an API call should happen, or that event handler should be, the scroll event handler should be called because it is attached to some heavy function and we don't want that heavy function to run again and again. But in reality, if we are not using the throttling concept, then I think in 1 second some 15-20 calls will happen to the event listener, scroll event listener. I will show you if we don't use throttling then what will happen on the UI. So yeah, let's get started with this. So on the UI we have two elements just to increase the width so that it becomes scrollable so that I can show you what I want to based on the scroll event. So we have a development aqua, we have a development lime. I will show you the styles here. So one is of colored aqua, which is of height 100 vh, that is one single screen, and then one more single screen, that is uh, the height of two screens. So that's how the UI will become scrollable with double the height of the screen height, which is visible. Okay, let me show you what I'm saying. So this is the thing. Can you see that there are two like colors? One is aqua and one is lime, and the screen is scrollable in this way. Okay, I hope you understand that. And we have attached a script index.js to it where we have implemented the throttling function. This is the heart of the throttling function, and this is the actual function which we need to call, that is the function print scroll. So what it is doing, we have a count global variable, so every time print scroll is called, we are incrementing the count and we are console logging the number of times this scroll function has been called. In place of this print scroll, there can be a very heavy function which is actually getting triggered on scroll event, which we want to throttle it. Okay, which we don't want to call it that many number of times. That's simple. Okay, so if you see inside the document dot add event listener, so the whole document we are adding the event listener of scroll, and inside that we are calling the throttle function. Let me show you first that when we don't call it and we just directly call the print scroll method, then what will happen on the UI? Going to the console. Now let's start. Can you see? I have just scrolled a little bit and 139 scroll events has been triggered. So that is a lot. If a heavy function is attached to this, then the UI will get blocked, definitely, and the user experience will be bad. The person will not come to your website again. So we need to resolve this, okay? How to resolve this? Let me remove this one and let me uncomment this. So we can do it with the help of throttle function, as I have mentioned. What is throttle function? So you can see that the throttle function is the return value of this throttle inside which we are passing the print scroll, that is our actual method which should be called on a scroll event, as well as the delay, that is 2000 milliseconds, that is of 2 seconds. So in throttling, now I will tell you the actual definition of throttling. So in throttling, let's say an event is triggered continuously, okay, in a very short amount of time, but we want, for let's say for this example, we want after every 2 seconds that event should be triggered. So let's say for 5 seconds we are actually scrolling the UI, scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. Till that time, if this throttling is not like implemented, my UI would have called the scroll event some 500 times. But with the help of this one, the UI will only be calling the scroll event. So let's say if it is 10 seconds, the UI will only be calling the scroll event for some 5 times. Okay, around 5 times. So that is the beauty of it. We are not calling the UI's scroll event again and again and again. We are actually limiting the amount frequency of the call with the help of this delay. Now let's go to the throttle function, what it is doing. So it is taking the function, this fx is the print scroll only, which we are passing from the throttle as the first parameter, and delay is 2000 milliseconds, which we are passing as the second parameter. We have taken a timeout id of null, and here we are returning a function. So I should try to emphasize on this, that we are returning a function. So this throttle fn, is this function only, okay, which we are calling inside this add event listener scroll event whenever it is triggered. So basically we are calling this function now whenever the scroll event is triggered. Okay, we are not directly calling this print scroll function. I hope you are able to understand that. Okay, so what this function is doing, you have to see. It will check if the timeout id is not null. Okay, if not of timeout id, it means that if timeout id is null, that not of timeout id will be true. So when it is true, it will go inside this. So this if condition is checking that if the timeout id is not, okay, sorry, if the timeout id is null, if the timeout id is null, in that case it will go inside. Okay, so after it goes inside, it will actually initialize the timeout id with a set timeout of the delay which we have mentioned, which is 2 seconds here. And after those 2 seconds, it will call the fx, and after calling that, it will clear the timeout and make the timeout id to null. Now let's say, I am triggering the scroll event, that is I am scrolling the UI up and down or in whatever direction, and that is triggering the scroll event some 20 to 30 times a second. Okay, let's say for example, it might be more than that. So it's triggering 20 to 30 times a second. So whenever it calls the scroll event, it will come inside this and it will check, is the timeout id null? No, it will not be null, because it is initialized with the return value of set timeout, and it is initially set to this timeout. Okay, and when this timeout will be resolved, then only we will be clearing the timeout and making the timeout id to null. So this actually ensures that only after 2 seconds this timeout id will become null, and the requests which are coming after that will be going inside the if condition, because then only the timeout id is null and the if condition not will be true, and again one more set timeout uh, will be initialized to this timeout id, and again for 2 seconds this is blocked, and then after 2 seconds this fx will be called, that is this print scroll function. So in this way we are actually able to achieve that, okay, every 2 seconds, after every 2 seconds only this print scroll function will be triggered, not before that, due to the help of this timeout id. Now you will say that, hey Shubhajit, how are we able to achieve this? We are returning a function, right? This throttle function to the throttle function. How is it able to use this timeout id is equal timeout id variable inside this when we have returned it out like somewhere else? Now this is the concept of closures in JavaScript. If you want a video in closures, do let me know in the comments. I will put it out. But just giving a glimpse of it. Closure basically what it does, it will see that okay, whatever function we are returning, whatever variables we are using, it will also take the variables. That is, it will take the whole thing and it will return. That is, it will also take the context of the variables which are being used inside the function, and it will store it along with the function variables. So in that way, we can use the variables which are present outside the function even if we have returned the function. Okay. So that's why we are able to use this timeout ID, because whatever variables which are present inside, which are used inside this but are present outside the context of the function, are also passed along with the function. Okay. So I hope you are able to understand that. Now let's see the things in action. The throttle function it is calling. Okay, this throttle function is actually this function, this one. Okay, and it is having a timeout, and it is calling fx only after every 2 seconds. Doesn't care, I will be triggering it thousands of times in a second, in 2 seconds. Still, it will be calling it for only one time. Okay, now let's go to the UI. Let's refresh it up. So the console. Hello, hustlers. Now let me start the scrolling. You should able to see on the console that scroll called 1, scroll called 2. I'm scrolling a lot faster. A lot of scroll events would have been triggered if I haven't used the throttle function. But can you see now that every 2 seconds only the scroll is getting called? So in that way, you are actually stopping the frequency of the function calls, and that is how throttling makes our life easy and optimized. So hopefully you are able to understand this video, and do share it. Do comment the doubts which you have. Definitely it will be helpful for others. So thanks a lot, guys.